Okay, good evening, everyone. I am Genesis Emery Foley, the newly appointed Chief Marketing Officer at Museum of the African Diaspora. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening for our Curator and Artist Talk. Before we begin, I want to call to your attention that there's a lovely QR code on your seats, and this is basically going to take you to our program survey so that we can collect more information from you about ways that we can continue to improve our programs here at MOAD, our exhibition series, and all the great things we're doing in the community. So if you don't mind, and as a personal favor to me, the new marketing person, can you please take the survey so we can, of course, make those improvements here in our museum. Also, if you like the work that we do here at MOAD, we'd love for you to support the museum by becoming a member. You can also, of course, make a very generous donation to help promote our programs and the great things we're doing across the African diaspora. And we'd love for you to continue to attend our events. One of the events I'd love for you to join us for is actually this weekend. In case you haven't heard, it's called the Afropolitan Ball. So it's a fabulous celebration where all the community leaders, politicians, artists, curators, designers, we all come together for a night of celebration, all in support of raising critical funds for MOAD's mission to celebrate the arts, Black art, culture, and community. So again, please join us on Saturday, October 5th for the Afropolitan Ball at the San Francisco Design Center. You can purchase your tickets online at moadsf.org/Afropolitan Ball, or you can also go downstairs at the front desk and buy your ticket. Additionally, just so you all know, in case you haven't heard the news, this week is our Nexus SF Bay Area Black Art Week, where we have partnered with a number of artists, galleries, studios, and different centers around the SF Bay Area community to elevate the lens of the African diaspora, Black art, and how we celebrate right here in the Bay Area and beyond. So please join us for these events. They're happening every night this week. They actually started on Tuesday, October 1st, and they will be continuing through Sunday, October 6th. Additionally, tonight we are here and gathered for the Curator and Artist Talk on Leather and Lace with Liberatory Living artists Malene Barnett and Bennett. I would love to introduce you to Key Jo Lee. She's our Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora right here in San Francisco. In this role, Key Jo oversees a strategic direction for the museum's exhibitions, our amazing programs, and of course she helps to lead the global strategic vision of our organization through the lens of art, culture, and the African diaspora. Key Jo's work expands MOAD's reach and our influence both locally, nationally, and internationally. Key Jo has a master's degree from and is also a PhD candidate in History of Art and African American Studies at Yale University. Her first book, Perceptual Drifts, Black Art and an Ethics of Looking, was published by Yale University Press and the Cleveland Museum of Art in January 2023. Additionally, Bennett, who is a Super Bowl champion and 3-time Pro Bowl defensive end, has significantly broadened his impact beyond football. As an activist, best-selling author, and devoted family man, Bennett channels his dedication to social justice and education into his professional pursuits. As the founder and creative director of Studio Cure, Bennett's work is focused on communicating through the African diasporic forms and languages. His designs ensure these influences are embedded across a spectrum of spatial scales from individual objects to comprehensive environments. Bennett believes that public art and architecture have the profound capacity to facilitate communal engagement, allowing personal emotions and ideas to be expressed and experienced in public space. Through Studio Cure, he continues to advance this vision, creating environments that honor and reflect diverse cultural narratives while fostering meaningful dialogue. And then lastly, Malene Barnett is an award-winning multidisciplinary artist, textile surface designer, and the founder of the Black Artists and Designers Guild, which is a global platform and community of independent Black makers. Malene's art reflects her African Caribbean heritage, building on her ancestral legacy of mark making as a visual identity, and has been exhibited at galleries and museums throughout the United States. Her art and design work has also been featured in major publications such as the New York Times, Architectural Digest, and Elle Decor. In 2024, which is this year, Malene released her first book, crafted Kingship Inside the Creative Practice of Contemporary Black Caribbean Makers, It, which includes interviews with over 60 artists of Caribbean heritage, taking readers on an important journey through the worlds of Black Caribbean creativity. This groundbreaking collection is the first to feature Caribbean makers' intimate stories of their art-making processes and how their countries of origin, the land, influences and informs how and what we create. Malene is a Fulbrighter. She gives talks nationally and publishes work raising awareness of Caribbean makers and ceramic art traditions of the Black diaspora. When she's not traveling the world researching Black diasporic aesthetics, Malene resides in Brooklyn, New York. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to our Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Public Programs, Key Jo Lee, our lovely Malene Barnett, and of course our superstar, Michael Bennett. Thank you and enjoy the talk.
Information, huh?
I know. You all do not have small resumes.
Yeah, I'm like, whoa.
So if you ever think you aren't doing anything, it's always nice to hear the gamut. So welcome, everyone. It's so lovely to see you here tonight at MOAD, both the new faces and familiar faces. Tonight is a celebration of these two artists, Malene Barnett, and Michael Bennett. Both of these artists were selected for inclusion in Liberatory Living because of the ways that they use material and materiality to draw us through their own personal, familial histories, but also through the history of the Black diaspora. And so before I even get started with these two amazing people, I actually want to start with you. How many of you have gone through the exhibition tonight or before? Amazing. So you witnessed Malene's work in the back gallery on the second floor, that beautiful surround of impressed ceramics that undulate right around that space. And you're seeing Michael's work in multiple places, both the leather sofa that you find here on the second floor, but also on the third floor in the bedroom. There is his Ursa Minor lamp, as well as the gumbo chair and stool that you'll also see images of, as well as the pawpaws chair, the beautiful wooden chair as soon as you enter the gallery on the third floor with the green velvet cushion. And so I want to ask you all, and we'll start maybe with Malene's work. Can you give me one word to describe either how it felt or what you saw, or what you experienced when you entered that gallery? One word is a challenge, I know. I'll give you a sentence.
Compelling materiality.
Compelling materiality, thank you. Anyone else? Inviting, wonderful. Aquatic, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? I thought it's...
Flowing and sleek.
Say again?
Flowing and sleek.
Flowing and sleek? What else? One more. Illusion, yes. And the work itself is called Illusion of Softness. And then maybe we will think about, and you can describe how you experience, in particular, the Pew's sofa that's on this second floor, that large leather sofa. Can you give a word or a statement to describe that work or your experience of it? Please. Home, beautiful. Reverential, absolutely. Anyone else? Yes. Distilled. Yes, that's beautiful. So thinking about taking the experience of being in the church pews or really close together and distilling it into a form. And so that's why this talk is called On Leather and Lace, because we're going to really explore the different materials that each of you are using and techniques of creation and how that actually enhances the meaning. So the underpinning of Liberatory Living is there are many questions. to what debt do museums owe to designers? How can design conspire with paintings and sculpture to create these really sacred and intimate spaces? And so I think that what we'll do is we may start with you, Malene, and let's first show your fantastic portraits. Illusions of softness. So what you don't know is that Malene was just started to make these this summer. We were talking about another work to install in the exhibition, and then I saw some bits behind her, and I said, but what is that? And so convinced her to do about a year's work in about 4 months.
Story.
Yeah. And so I'm hoping that you might speak to us a little bit about why lace and a little bit about how this has come about.
Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you, Key Jo and Moad, for this opportunity to make the work that I've been dreaming of making for a long time. I was going on a residency at Hambidge, the residency that we had our studio visit with, and before I went on the residency, my mother, she gave me a pile of lace and said, oh, I have this lace, you know, I'm sure you'll do something with it, you know, and and so I honestly, I took the lace not knowing what I would do with it, but I thought, let me bring it with me on the residency. And she told me that it was a lace that she's had since she's migrated from St. Vincent in the Caribbean. My mother's 81 years old, and she's been here since she was about 19. And so she's had this lace. And I actually, when I held the lace, I started to remember how that lace decorated the table for those special occasion dinners, whether it was the Christmas or the Thanksgiving. You know, I actually called my older sister and I sent her a picture. I said, do you remember these? She says, yeah, it was under the fruit punch bowl on the dining table. And I started thinking about that glass bowl that we would bring out, again, only for special occasions. And then I started to think more about how this material held so many memories. And I thought, not just for me and my family. And I started thinking about how it held memories just for Black families in general. Yes. You know, and so it took me on a deeper dive of thinking about the textile histories, and not just about the beauty that these objects created in our house, you know, whether it was on the dining table or the back of the chair, the side of the chair. So when I started asking friends and family, specifically from the Caribbean, you know, I said, do you remember this? They're like, oh yeah, doilies, I remember. And everyone had this like nostalgic moment. It was pretty joyful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you and I had a moment over it as well. So my grandmother, over top of the plastic that was on every surface, were doilies and lace.
No, exactly. But you know, then I started to think about, you know, when we think about those stories and the plastic, right? We look down on it like it was like, oh no, you don't do plastic, and oh no, the doilies. But I wanted to reimagine the doily and give it a higher level of respect. And how during that time when I was growing up, and for many of us, it really brought us a lot of joy, and it was a status symbol. It showed a sign that we made it in a way. And then I thought about the Black women who were actually making the doilies. You know, this was a way of taking pride in their homes, right? Also pride in being able to make something for the family. And, you know, mostly it was the women who were decorating space.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, that ties so beautifully into what Bell Hooks is talking about in the essay Home Place, which is one of the underpinnings of the exhibition, is how Black women in particular were creating these home place. Doesn't mean just a house. It means that place where you can imagine the world otherwise. And it is a place that hosts beauty and adornment and softness. It is the soft place to land. And so, yes, our mothers and our grandmothers were creating these very soft places to land, utilizing this beautiful textile.
And I also want to, not overlook the fact that these doilies were also, we adopted it. It was a European way of showing status and pride, but we took it in as we've taken a lot of the objects that we were forced to develop a kinship to and turned into something our own. And so that was really the impetus of creating this sculpture of showing how being a part of the Black diaspora, that we have that ability to shape our own future, shape our own existence, and using clay as a way of molding and thinking about that in space.
Thank you. And Michael, you have also had a chance to see Malene's installation. I would love to hear from you how you experienced it.
I experienced it like very sacred, because of the scale of it. I think looking at the material and kind of repetition of shapes and over through color, I definitely felt like a sense of calmness, and I could see a sense of reflection and through the material that the material was very sacred, and didn't even know it was from her mother, but I can definitely feel that this material was something because the way that it kind of was shaped and the way that it was processed, and then also thinking of the heaviness of it. I'm like, man, this thing, the scale of this and the weight of this must be really, really heavy, in a sense. Like for me, a lot of times I think about mass and not just the word in just one sentence, but like mass and congregation and mass and scale, and like thinking about this object is mass, but it's also bringing people together. And the way that it's positioned in that room, the way it kind of corners through the whole space, it allows it to feel like there's an exaggeration of this and it keeps going and it's generational. I think there's something that the linkage to it, like you could tell that this is not just something that's about now, it's something that very connects from the past and the present and kind of lives in the now. That's kind of what I was feeling while I was in there thinking about it. Because there's the way it's kind of like that bench there. It feels like you're supposed to be contemplating who you are and how you think about material and just like the human condition in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the making of the work itself, because I'm certain everybody is wondering how you created this beautiful set of objects.
Well, this is me in my studio. This is the very beginning. I have one of the laces that my mother gifted me before I left, and this was the actual doily that I did use to create some of those pieces. This is one of them. And what I was doing was I also collected some doilies in the thrift stores in Georgia when I was during my residency, because that was my way of connecting the diaspora. I had St. Vincent, I had the Caribbean, I wanted to have the African American experience because I always feel the synergy between. And that's my experience anyway, because I'm first generation born here. So my work is constantly in conversation with all these experiences. And so what I was doing was rolling out the slabs of clay. And if you look at the next slide, you could see how I actually laid down the different doily patterns on the clay. And I would roll the clay over, the rolling pin over the doilies to create the different impressions. And it was purposely done in a patchwork style because it wasn't about creating anything in repeat, right? It was about really representing these different experiences, because I always think diaspora is a patchwork of experience, and we're constantly creating and adding and going back to the past to add to our future. And so I would continue that process in repetition and over and over. And so in the next slide, you'll see how once I would create the slab, then I would start to mold. And these were some of the very first pieces that I thought I would never use. Because I figured, I made so many. But no, I actually did include them. And so it's a process. I rolled the slabs at different thicknesses to test out what would hold best. And in the beginning, they were thinner. And then as I realized I needed to make them a little thicker to hold in a different way. And then I also used 5 different clay bodies, from white to black, to really represent the different people and communities in the Caribbean specific. And here you could see how the different doilies are constantly placed on the clay, and each time I would place it, it would be different. And that was all. There was also beauty in that repetition, because I didn't know what was going to appear, and I didn't know which part of the pattern was going to be more dominant than the other.
And thinking of, again, the clay bodies and the ways that you're molding these. So when you were putting snippets on Instagram, people thought it was fabric, right? It really challenges the eye. And you also noted that, so this patchwork, so if you're looking at illusions of softness and you see all the different colorations, there is some reference to every part of the Caribbean. So you will find yourself there, including colors of the Pan-African flag and other colors. So you will find yourself in that space, no matter from where you hail.
Yeah, because the colors started with, let me pay nods to my mother's home country, St. Vincent flag. That's the blue, that's the gold, and that's the green. Then I said, I got to pay homage to my father's side. That's the Jamaican side. And then there's some crossover on the color with the gold, right, and the green. But then I when I brought in the red, I saw how it connected to the Pan-Africanist flag, and I wanted to have that synergy between the spaces again. And then as it grew, I said, no, I just need to bring in all colors, right? And because the idea when people would come in, I thought about how there's going to be certain color patterns and color that people would gravitate towards, and I wanted everybody, no matter whether they're from the Caribbean or not, that they would be able to find some connection to the space.
Thank you so much. And so this is a rendition of what you're seeing. So I also only saw snippets of things before we got 4 enormous crates.
Yes, they were big, y'all, really big. And it took a whole day to pack.
Listen, it took a whole day to unpack.
I'm not surprised.
So thank you. But one of the things that I think is so beautiful, and what you said, Michael, is about the intimacy, which is something that I find so present in every piece that we've included in the show of yours. They are suggestive of this intimate space, but also an intimacy with the archive, an intimacy with one's ancestors, an intimacy with a kind of global sensibility. And so I wanted to start with actually the gumbo chair and stool, which you'll find in the bedroom-like space on the 3rd floor. So that entire space is meant to help us to consider how could you shape your space to give you your not just best dreams, but your most expansive, cosmic, infinite dreams. What is required? Where do you need quiet? Where do you need softness? Where do you need gentleness? And even though the gumbo chair and stool are quite starkly black, there's something really soft about them. So I'm wondering if you might tell us a bit about how this design came into being.
I think, speaking of that, I think a lot of times when I talk about some of my work, just like politically or other stuff I've done, has always been about humanizing the Black experience, and vulnerability is about also humanizing the Black man, because a lot of times people overlook Black men to have emotions, like even as an athlete, like dealing with the body, like people only see us cry when we lose a championship, or there's an experience with this loss of like maybe dealing with, compensation or this, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's about like humanizing just the experience of loving my daughter or picking these things up. So the work always speaks through that type of vulnerability, because I think that's really important to me, how I see the world, right? I think when I think about the gumbo stool, it's just so ironic. I'm in a space right now. I got to deal with Louisiana twice. I was with Gina this morning in San Jose looking at, which was kind of crazy, because I'm like, damn, Louisiana got so many goddamn prisons. But it was like I was dealing with that. And then I happened to be in a room with Jessica's work right now that's pretty much mapping my historical history of just being from Louisiana. So like I'm just honored to be in this. I didn't know I was going to be in a space that had Louisiana all over. Honestly, I was like, oh shit, it's everywhere. Like that's where I grew up. My family's been there since slavery. So like why is the work like that? It's like I'm trying to like have a conversation that isn't so much about a traumatic experience. It's really about this experience of kind of like love, right? This idea of what does it feel like to grow up in a home with family? What does it feel like to grow up with a grandmother, a grandfather, to have those experiences of being in a church? Like the vulnerability of understanding love, I think a lot of times for me in this work, and I talk about generational wealth, it's not generational wealth to me, isn't this idea about capitalism, is really this idea about love, like generational love, like that is like the key to moving forward in just humanity. So in the work, I'm really trying to have conversations about what does gumbo mean to me. Gumbo is kind of like this idea of being under the magnolia tree, and after church, my grandfather, we all under there, and we just passing and eating gumbo. Some people eating gumbo with a fork. I never got that, understood that. Why? It's a soup. You can't eat that with a fork, right? But we eating under this magnolia tree in like material, and like having something, this shiny black material, and then also the back, a sense of roughness, a sense of, people call ashiness or something, but like this rough material through the resin, kind of to me speaks to form. I think the form of this is kind of looking back at the monoblock chair that's kind of used in a lot of his ambiguous through the world. Like, in every community, people have weddings with those white block chairs. Like they're everywhere. There are weddings, funerals, and this is my way of kind of looking at that form and kind of think about it in that form. Like, and for me, it's also like looking at architecture a lot. Like being in architecture school, like these ideas of if the forms that were made, what would they be like if they were scaled up, if they were buildings. So like that's really kind of how I'm thinking about a lot of the stuff, honestly.
That's beautiful, and it also makes me think of the ways that you are both taking the things that might become very ordinary, right, and go without notice, and really elevating them to the level of notice by really focusing on that form. And I really want to pause at the importance of the understanding that trauma is not our only generational inheritance. So too is joy, so too is a drive toward beauty, so too is the ability to laugh at the cognitive dissonance that we have to experience every day. Those are also our inheritance. That is our actual wealth.
That's why when you called me, I was like, okay, cool, that sounds great. Like, I fuck with that. Yeah, that's cool. Like radical joy, yeah, like why not? Like I was like, yeah, that's dope. I'll do that. Let me know.
So there's both the chair and the stool, but then there are moments where it becomes even softer with this padding. Yeah.
I think for me, Black women have always been obviously one of the most important things of like growing up in like what they kind of what they do for the family, not just in the sense of like just taking care of the family, but also like the stability of the family. So a lot of this is kind of going back into thinking about Black women, and then my sisters and my cousins getting their hair braided, right? Looking at like these African stools and like these neck rests, like how they used to braid hair and how they used to take mats and put them on the ground while they were getting their hair braided. So a lot of that's kind of what that form is kind of informing, is like looking at these African diasporic experiences and how they translate into American experiences of looking at hair or looking at culture and having these conversations. I mean, I see my sister get her hair braided for 8 hours. I'm like, you still here? Like, it's going on hour 7, you know? And like, she's just sitting there, but they having conversations with my mother and my grandmother and everybody. So, and then making a cushion that was like, how could you make a structure that feels like it continues to give? Like the experience of being able to have a mat on it, but then put it on the ground, and like kids could be sitting down while their mother or cavern doing this, right? Because it's like, it's so much about these communal experiences through the process of thinking about design for me.
Thank you so much. And then we have the Pawpaw's chair, which I fell in love with. And I'm hoping that you can, and there I just wanted to give a sense of, so Pawpaw's chair is the chair that's here on, I can't tell which direction it is when I'm turned around like that, y'all, over there. As well as with the cushion on the ground, cradling you as well. But this is one of the Pawpaw chairs. So I was hoping you would speak a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I think for me, like that was one of the first things I kind of was making. Like I was in school too, and like I'm like, I got to make while I'm in school, because it's like I feel like there's a pressing time. So meanwhile, while I'm doing schoolwork, I'm also like designing and making and working with one of the fabricators in Hawaii. And like when I was thinking about the Pawpaw's chair, I was kind of thinking about this idea about family structure, looking at the patriarch and matriarchs of family. So I made the table and the chair together because they kind of coexist. And like looking at the history of Pawpaw, my grandfather, you know, looking at the historical sense of like what he kind of added to me. Like I grew up in kind of between a small town and a major town. I came from a small town, Louisiana, you know, maybe like 7,000 people. And then my parents moved. My dad was in the military, so I kind of ended up living in Texas. And then, so I'd go back in the summer times and like be with my grandpa, and like, boy, it was like church and the farm. It was like you in the church, and then we had to go outside and do all the farming. Like my grandmother was like, you know, y'all, what y'all want to eat tonight? Collard greens, sweet potatoes, go get it, and watermelon, all these different things. And in the meantime, it's like, so you guys go out there and pick that, you know what I mean? So we had to go pick the okra, do all this stuff, then we bring it back in there. Then my grandma would wash it, and then she would cook it, and then that's how like family was been. So like I was kind of thinking about the stability of that and looking at that, and then just thinking about architecturally how things connect, the stability of a design, something that feels like it shouldn't be, you know, strong, but then that's it, you know. Then looking at sapele wood and thinking about material, then the curvature. I was in Japan a couple years ago. I was with Diasporic, and we were eating, and I broke like 4 chairs. And I'm a big guy, like no offense, like I'm a big guy, but I was so mad because first of all, Diasporic was laughing at me a lot. I'm like, look, bro, don't laugh at me like that, you know. And then so the chair kept breaking, and then I was like, but the reason why I was designing because I was centering the black body. So the designs that I want to make wanted to think about the black body in scale, think about the black body in space, think about the black body as space, and also as structure. That was what I was kind of designing, these type of designs, these designs that feel like they can hold me, you know. These are gumbo eating people, chairs, collard green, sweet potato, macaroni and cheese, jambalaya, green eggs and ham, potatoes, yams. No, I'm just joking, but this is what I was thinking like when I was kind of designing like the stability of the black body versus this idea that whenever I'm in Sweden or maybe in Europe or maybe in Italy, like those designs aren't really made for us. You know, they're made, it's like we're trying to squeeze it in, you know. Like prior to BBLs, everybody had, you know what I'm saying? Like my grandmother was like, I don't know why everybody get BBLs. Why they want this? I'm like, Momo, stop.
And Malene, I noticed you spending a good amount of time with this chair earlier today, a little bit of time. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind reflecting a little bit on the shape of this chair or what drew you to it in the gallery.
Well, it's funny you talk about how you're making for the black body, because, you know, my first reaction was like, I wanted to sit on the chair. I wanted to feel a sense of regalness. I felt like this chair was made for me. I'm a textile person, so having a cushion, it showed that there was this level of wanting us to be comfortable, all right? And I think we need to have more spaces where we can feel comfortable. Yes. Right? And feel there was an invitation to sit and contemplate. And, you know, I really think about the importance of us having those objects around us. I could see it in many spaces, you know, whether it's in a library, yes, a bedroom, the corner, the hallway. It has multiple usage. So that was my first reaction. Like, it was an invitation to like sit and contemplate and dream and think about our future.
That means a lot to me because that's kind of what I really wanted too, right? Because like looking at the history of how in Ghana, how kings would make stools and the importance of chairs and the importance of designing those things, and then thinking about making something that feels regal but also feels like it's for the people. I think that's really what it comes down to, and so I'm really honored that you felt that. So yeah.
And speaking of for the people, definitely want to talk about this work. So, you know, in my contemplation of the pew sofa, I was thinking about many things. So I'm often thinking about, well, what is the liberatory potential of concealment, right? We are, and you have heard me say this now, we are often tasked with revealing our soft underbelly again and again and again in a bid for empathy that doesn't always come. And so I'm really interested in investing in those if you know spaces, in those spaces that I was saying about Chantal Hildebrand's work upstairs. If done right, you're only going to see woke women in pictures. And so I think that there was an intimacy again here, but it was a challenge as well because for me, the Black church is so important for fostering that love, but it can also be a space that beats back other kinds of liberation. And so what I loved was the challenge of thinking about this work.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of my professors from school was here, Phoebe, back in the back, Phoebe White. Back in one of her classes, it was a landscape class, and we were talking about hostile architecture and just like landscape and like how things could be inviting and non-inviting, how people could use architecture or design to be divisive. Like they could make something that could be purposeful, or they could use design for something other than that. And for me, when I was thinking about this thing, I was mostly thinking about that experience of landscape and architecture and the shape of topography of this thing. We did this one project where we had to map an island, and I did this island off the coast that was kind of looking at the topography from the top, and I started to shape it. We had the opportunity to play with clay and kind of mold it to that experience, right? And then for this, it wanted to be about like the shaping of Black bodies and this idea of bringing Black people closer together and also bringing people, whoever sat in this, to have intimate space. And for me, the pews represents a lot about my experiences of growing up in the church. It's like, that's pretty much like, we spent a lot of time in the church. And like, we would always be there. It didn't matter. I think I loved about being in that experience, it didn't matter about, it wasn't no hierarchy, right? It wasn't about how much money you made, how much you did this. It was about, at this moment, we could find something that was close that we can all represent. And my time in sports, I always felt like that. As an athlete, we would, for some reason, we could all like hate each other and do all this stuff, but we would all have one common goal. And I think thinking about this is the idea of bringing family closer together. I think about my daughters a lot and the moments that we have these together to be there, to have conversation, and the materiality and the shape. I wanted to find something that was very curvature and not so much strict, similar, different from like maybe something in the Bauhaus type of tradition where this maybe form equals function or function equals form. Maybe something more like narrative leads to form, and thinking about having a narrative about the experience of church put into something and pulling that, because sometimes it's, for me, it's really about abstraction. What does this thing actually look like if it was scaled up? How could we bring people together? You know, looking at all those things is kind of what kind of informed this kind of work. It's like informed that type of design is really what I was thinking about. It's like these different types of experiences in there. Like you said, it's very challenging, right? Because, you know, church has so many stigmas on it, right? But I think for me, it's about this secular experience, this experience about communion, this spiritual, intimate kind of conversation and gathering and bringing thought, collective thought, you know, cultural dialogue. I think that's really what I was kind of thinking about in this design.
And there's also such weight and heft in both of the works, like literal weight and heft. So the sofa is 450 pounds, right? And I don't even know how many pounds, but it's also that you all are lending giving these ideas, not just form, but weight is incredibly important. This is something that's going to be lasting. These are things that are transferable. These are things that are building an alternative archive. And I just want to call Jessica Monette into this space because that is the artist that created the works that are surrounding you, that are reflecting her experience of Katrina. So when she was 18, her family home was destroyed by Katrina. So this is all archived from that space, the exact same house paint from her home, dirt and soil, clothing. And so it gives it this weight and creates the archives that we are often rejected from.
No, I think so too. I think it's heavy to be considered as a Black intellectual, or to be able to have conversation. My whole life as an athlete, I had to not. It was always like, you're thinking too much, Michael. You're talking too much. You're bringing up conversations. Why are you talking about Palestine, Israel? You're not supposed to be doing that. You know, like there's always coaches, conversations with Roger Goodell. You know, it's just like, it's like, so it's like to be conscious is kind of heavy, right? It's like that's the problem, right? It's like, even for me, retiring was like this really tough thing, because physically I could still do it, but mentally I was just like, do I want to, you know, in my mind, like what, I already conquered the body to the highest level, but what's the next level of, you know, conquering the mind? So like to think about your brain or to think about objects and creativity is weighty, because it is a conversation that often, you know, historically has been an issue, you know, whether it's like we're talking about this, using our minds to think about this. You know, I was just back in Hawaii, I was talking to the Department of Education, and we're talking about Black history and implementing it better into schools, and like this idea that like people don't even understand the Black ingenuity that they experience on a daily basis, where there's a stoplight, could be all these Black designers, the computer chip, the phone, the bottom of our shoe, all the lights, like, you know, Thomas Edison got all the credit, but obviously stole it from somebody else that was like, hey man, the light came on. It was like, it did? Oh, thank you. Yeah, so this is gonna be my thing, you know? So like this idea that Black intellectualism has always been stolen and performed and coded in something else other than Blackness. And so thinking about that intellectually is super heavy, because it's like when you become conscious, you gotta watch out, you know?
Oh boy. Yes, I'm guessing. I'm wondering about how weight figures into your work, and then we're going to get to questions.
Well, I use the weight of the clay as a metaphor for the heaviness of our colonial histories. You know, that's why when it was interesting, because when people would see, as you mentioned earlier, people would see the objects prior, they would think it was fabric. And so when we think of fabric, it's light, it's movable, right? But I wanted to use a material that I knew would help. That's one that's grounding, because it's coming from the earth. Once it's actually cured, it's heavy, right? Once it's fired, I fired twice. And there's just so much weight that we do carry around because of these histories, right? But then I also wanted to put it against that when we do look, we do think this lightness of and the beauty and the comforting of a fabric, of a soft object, yeah. Right? And I wanted to have that conversation with both, knowing that yes, we could have these really dark and traumatic histories, but it doesn't mean that we have to carry it with us always, right? And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. I want to turn to the audience. If you have questions for either of our fantastic speakers, now is the time.
I see some familiar faces in the audience, so thank you for coming.
Hold on to this other mic that's wrapped around it.
Oh, like this? So, I have a question for both of you. I may get the second one out first because I'm looking at the piece. So when I looked at this, I thought about the hardness of a church pew. And what immediately struck me about this one is the softness of it. And then when I looked at the piece, the stool ahead of that one, I thought about how, for my grandfather, I always think about the high back of the chair, because he is like the leader of the family, is sitting in this like kind of throne kind of position. But I noticed that piece is kind of on the bottom, and the top of it is very fragile. And I was interested in like the intention behind that. It seems like the backbones and the arms of Black people are kind of in the foundation of the work. And then the fragility is kind of existing on the top. And I thought about the play sort of being between the fragility and the hardness being really interesting. And then when I looked at Malene's work, I thought a lot about your house that you live in Brooklyn, and how like texture really figures into design. And I don't know what the question is, but I'm just sort of like really interested in how you think about softness and texture and like the feeling of things when you're thinking about this like soft place to land for Black women. Because I feel like the design of your home and the design of this is like, the texture of it is very intentional.
I think she answered her own question. I was like, wait, am I supposed to answer that? She answered it for me. You were exactly right. That's what I was thinking.
you really did bring to the fore where there is light, where there's buoyancy, and where the grounding, where the grounding exists and where there's buoyancy and where there's light. So you both are such beautiful technicians that even with the weight, there's always buoyancy, there's always some element of light in every work.
No, I think for me, especially on the Pawpaw's chair, I think going back to like architecture and kind of looking at structure and like the inside of a structure, you know, I was kind of thinking about how the chair could also play with light too, like how it passes through, how the back could sit through there. I never thought about it in the sense of how she talked about this idea of like maybe how something is submerged, you know, maybe an iceberg on the top and then like underneath there's something massive. I never thought about it like that, but I guess if you look at it like that, I kind of do see that, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, it's just kind of what I was kind of thinking about, you know, looking at this idea of like, you know, structure and also light, architecture, darkness. If this was scaled up, what would it be? So for me, that's pretty much how I was thinking about it too. And then kind of thinking also like historically looking at like something maybe in like Burkina Faso where, you know, Malene, I don't want to mess it up, but how she's talking about like pots and design and ceramics and looking at that historical thing where the wife or woman would die in that family and they would break all of the ceramics because that was the soul of an object. So like through a lot of these objects, it's kind of like seeing the soul of historical things and evidence popping up in a lot of those designs. So I kind of think about family and structure in a lot of the work too.
Hi. This question is to both of you. I feel like we touched on it a little bit throughout the talk in terms of both of you engaging with like this theme of duality in the work, of like engaging with really serious and weighted history, but also like not pushing past it, but like also seeing and trying to reimagine future and space through the context of design, but also through the context of sculpture. And I'm curious to just maybe hear a little bit more about what's kind of pushed you towards making work of that nature, where you're engaging with, yes, really dark stuff, but also pushing past a little to see a light. I think it's really inspiring and kind of an emerging trend right now in art amongst Black artists. And I know that recently I've kind of moved into that space as well. So I'm really curious to hear from both of you how you feel about that.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, for me, it started with I wanted to know more about my family history, right? I've always had this romantic relationship with the Caribbean, because that's where I know my mother and my father and my grandmother's origin story is. But I wanted to go deeper and try to understand, like, how was this part of the world created? Because it was created. It was a creation, right? And when you understand the history of the Caribbean and how it was developed, you can't deny what happened, right? Because and so by digging into these family stories and understanding the history of, say, whether it was Jamaica, St. Vincent, and the interesting facts about both those countries is that my father comes from one of the first colonized countries, and my mother comes from one of the last to have independence. But they both had communities that were fighting against the British, meaning the Maroons from Jamaica, the Garifuna, and St. Vincent. And so for me, there was always, there was always the group that was going against. And so I feel that's in my DNA, right? I come from a generation from the Maroons and the Garifuna. And so once you start to know who you are and self, you realize you're like, okay, history, you can't change it. It's fact. I want to know the facts. The more facts I know, the more empowered I become. So now I think, okay, being a part of the diaspora, what are the beautiful points? What can we control, right? How is it that my ancestors were able to get through all of this and bring me to this point? How can I continue to celebrate them, right? So these are the things that I think about in the work. And so it's a constant celebration and conversation with the ancestors. And so how do I make them proud? I know what they had to go through, right? We can't change that. But what I could continue to do is make work to bring the light and not allow what they work towards to go without being addressed in a beautiful way. Because our history, we know it was very traumatic, and it still lives with us in many ways. But that doesn't mean that we have to always start our story that way. There could be the softness and then take us back to what it really was. And so I'm trying to like change that conversation to say, listen, there are some really challenging and inhumane experiences that Black people have gone through, and we continue to, but that doesn't mean that is our complete story. It's only a portion of the story. And as artists, I feel we have the tool and we have the ability to change history through our work.
That's deep. I can't go after. No. It's just something that you said that really resonates with me is the DNA, because similar to like what you're saying, like a couple years ago, back in 2017, I was watching Anthony Bourdain. Like everybody kind of would experience the world through Anthony Bourdain. You like before you go somewhere, you'd be like, let me see what Anthony Bourdain thought. Then one day I was watching that show and I saw Chef Pierre back there, and I was like, man, what the hell? Like, they eating gumbo. They doing all the stuff that I grew up doing in Senegal. I mean, in Louisiana, which was in Senegal where he was, and he was going through all these different places. And I saw a little bit of me in some of that stuff. And fast forward, I was already doing a project in Senegal for Black girls in schools. And then I was going to Senegal, and then I was like, oh yeah. So I hit up Chef Pierre. I was like, yeah, man, I'm going out there. Can you hook me up with some people? He's like, yeah, I'll send you some people and send you to these. He's like, I would be there, but I have something else to do. I'm going in the next month. And so I was doing my African DNA with Gina Page and African ancestry. Then it comes to find out I was actually from Senegal. Oh, wow. So that's kind of how I went to Senegal under that type of context, like similar to what you're saying. Like for a long period of time, I was a floating soul. Like I didn't actually have the footing to say that, like, you know, like, where did we come from? How did we get here? I just knew that we've been in Louisiana for a long period of time, and I grew up on Bennett Road. You know what I'm saying? And like going to Senegal, it kind of centered me into this design realm, because that's where my studio name came from, was Kerr, home. And I knew that it was a sense of place. I was like, I wasn't from there, but I was from there. Like everywhere I went, I got a sense of like people were crying because it came back. It was like that type of connection. And sitting there on Goree Island, similar to what you're saying, and seeing the understanding the weight of what my ancestor might have felt through that experience is the reason why, you know, why we want to tell that story through the work. Is kind of like understanding what a griot was, and the purpose of a griot, the historical context of the art, the historian, the orator, the leader, all these things that I kind of was doing already. Like you said, that was already in my DNA. So to do this work, it felt like it was already in my DNA.
So thank you for the work. I mean, the work is incredible. I guess I'm thinking about two ideas of celebration and invitation. So with the fabric that's weighty, and I'm glad you brought up the flags, because it was almost like looking at flags that are heralded. You know, they're not folded, they're not flowing, but they're somehow all together. And the fact that they're heralding curled like this, but also have gravity, right? And then what is it to celebrate with gravity? Not just weightiness, but gravity. And then Mike, you know, the pew, I was thinking about the ways in which it invites a certain kind of receptivity. Right? It's not a hard pew. And even from the back, it almost looks like an old school baseball glove. You know, where, you know, you're being caught, you know, as if, you know, you're gonna catch the people. And, you know, I would love to hear you muse a bit about those two things of celebration and invitation, celebration and receptivity.
Me first? Yeah. I think for me, it is about celebrating who we are and where we came from. I remember one of my professors, Carla, I was doing a project one time, and she was like, Michael, it's not your job to be like any one of these European architects or designers. It's your job to tell your story through who you are and your experience. And I think for me, like, wanting to celebrate my own heritage and find new things, like this exploration, that there is no arrival. There's always this exploration, this an iteration that will constantly come. So like, to celebrate that, celebrate the process of thinking, celebrate the process of making, celebrate the process of bringing something from the mind into a form is a great thing. And then that thing that you would, contemplate in your mind to bring together, that it wouldn't be something about the individual, but it would be something of parts that would bring a whole together. And I think that's truly what I think about celebrating the work and thinking about that, and making sure that it is invitation, right? I think when I retired from the NFL, I had a lot of time to think. I mean, you get a lot of time to think. I was like, damn, baby, these hours go by fast, huh? I just dropped the kids off. I got to go pick them up again. But during that time, I was kind of like trying to find a word to like kind of like think about, and it was this idea of communion. And so like thinking about work that invites gathering, and invites people, and invites conversation, it invites thought, it invites this idea of a through line through different mediums to express that is truly what I want to do in a lot of these things, whether it's in architecture, whether it's in installation, or whether it's in furniture. I'm always trying to do that thing.
Well, I'll just add that I feel that every time that I'm in the studio, it's an opportunity to celebrate, because I'm there with it. For me, celebration is also gratitude, right? I express the gratitude to be able to get up and work in a medium that I love. I feel the gratitude to be able to have the ability to be curious about the histories, and then to be able to create objects and experiences so people could be inspired to celebrate and really embrace who they are, embrace Black culture, be curious. I look at all of these ways of being as a celebration. And so, it's not always like, it's not always about, throwing down to some soca and reggae and, sipping on ginger beer and sorrow. But it is about, for me, the making is the celebration. And I really hope that by you experience it, that you create another celebration from that experience in that room. Like, you go back to your space and find ways to celebrate yourself, celebrate your family, celebrate your existence, celebrate the community. Because one of the reasons why I create is because I want the community to be in constant celebration, because it's our right to celebrate. And so when you come from a history of not being able to do it on a regular, I want every day to be that celebration. So, and that's part of it's part of being resistant to what wasn't. And so now we have that right and power to do and create what it is that we want to be. So.
Questions, right?
Now I'm thinking about what you just said. I forgot my question. I was, Michael, this is, I guess, a question for you. I am really inspired by the connection to your like the intimate connection of your work to your family, to your experiences as a child. And but I am also curious just about, so I feel like I have a really good sense of your process and your kind of intellectual process with your work for both of you. But I was curious about just fabrication, like the practical creation of your pieces, Michael. It's like could you speak a little bit about how the furniture is made and whether it's being created from a drawing or whether you're actually making it yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, creating is iteration. So like start with a sketch, modeling, making, tearing apart, and then like thinking about, cutting foam, or you could be using, we make so many models every single day. It could be clay, it could be a lot of things to try to find form. And I think a part of my journey is writing. I come from, always writing and thinking and like writing what am I trying to say? How am I trying to say it? And how does form kind of like emulate that? And so it's like in the studio, it's a lot of model making, and then working with fabricators and artisans on, really communicating those things. So many times you making something, you're like, that's just not it, like taking the legs off, but like, I worked with Kevin in the studio, who was my classmate in school, and we was like, hey, yo, we like working together. Let's just start working together. And so through that process, we always make models. Every single day it's like making models and then doing that. So I think model making is a big part of the process. And also sketching, right? It's like sketch a lot, then go to the computer, start in programs, and then in Rhino, then move to Revit, and then we would, or whatever. It's always kind of like using models is really the main thing before we scale up. It's like, can we see how this thing kind of feels, and what was this? And then like, when I'm drawing sketches, I always draw people, like not sitting on them, but walking through tunnels. Like, so it's like thinking about that. I think a lot of it is model making and kind of iterating and not just really, that's really the process, really.
Okay. So I don't really have a question, but I did want to just comment on the art that both of you all have created. I think that it's really interesting given that one of the artists is coming from like the Caribbean, and then another coming from Louisiana, but also, tying in the heritages from other parts of the African continent. And so I'm from California. My family has been here since 1890, and I really have no immediate ties to experiences that folks have had in down south. And I think that it's very interesting that just viewing the artwork on the screen, that I was immediately able to resonate with the experiences of the Pawpaw's Chair, growing up with my grandfather and all of the love that he poured into our family, and he was the pillar of the family. And so I just found that to be in a very striking emotion that I had just viewing it. I haven't even been able to experience the live furniture art that you've created. And then you discussed some of the stories about the women in your family and the experiences that I share getting my hair done and definitely needing to get a couch cushion to sit there for a long period of time. And I just feel that is amazing that you have taken an experience from your own family, and that from thousands of miles away that I'm able to connect with that same experience. And I think that it's remarkable that you've created a modern day, like tangible form of art that folks from African diaspora can connect with, that doesn't seem so heavy, because for myself, it's been difficult to watch some of the movies that depict our story. And I think that it's amazing that you two have lightened up what our culture and our history is about, and it gives folks like myself just something tangible to hold on to, and to just really begin my journey of unpacking my family's history. And then going into the doilies, I mean, I grew up during the holidays. That was definitely something that my mother and grandmother would put out during like Thanksgiving to lie out all of the dishes for us to connect. And immediately it just took me back to when my grandparents were alive, and it now makes me want to go back and have a conversation with my mother and ask her more about some of the pieces, because she's kept them for generations, and I've never really sat down to understand like, whoa, this is something that has not only just come from our family, but I was here at this panel discussion, and I'm now discovering that this is a piece that has been translated from across the waters. And so I just wanted to thank you both for giving this generation something, again, tangible to hold on to and bringing it here to California, because I do think that being from California, we are a tad bit removed from some of the Southern experiences, which is the root of where a lot of our ancestors come from, and then they had the Great Migration here. So don't really have a question, but I do want to thank you both for tying in the African diaspora culture and heritage for me, because, yeah, I'm definitely going to bring friends and family to have the, whatever they experience, but I'll definitely be bringing other folks over, because I don't think that we have a lot of these forms or mediums to connect with outside of the heaviness in our historical culture. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I didn't mean to scare anyone by asking about time. You guys have any questions?
Hi, Michael. I was looking at your furniture, and I was thinking a lot about the body and the language of furniture, like legs, arms, back, And I was looking at the pews, and from my own personal experience in church, I remember being like squished up, as a little kid in between my grandma's body, and my brother's. And I just wanted to ask if you were thinking about like that feeling of being like squished in the pew when you were making that, about bodies and like.
Yes, 100%. The time when they used to pass the tithing plate, and then we would act like we was putting money in there. Be like, bam, like that's. You never did that? You act like you put money in there. You didn't put. You just hit your finger and the coins pop up. But yeah, I was thinking about this idea of bringing people closer together in that way, like that experience of being there, like the idea of getting ready for Sunday church, and the time they bring that one little suit out, you put that on and going down there, like the nobility of that process was super important to this design. That's really kind of the cultural thing that I was really thinking about, is that, going back to that, like whether it's like in public spaces, like maybe looking at a bus stop, and then like how people become super close to somebody that they don't know, or being on a plane, like this idea of this planier thing that has seats and is always bringing people closer, and how design make it something, that was cushioned, that could bring people and sit next to each other, have conversations, because I truly believe that things start to change when we have conversations. So making objects around that idea of bringing people closer together to have dialogue is really where that comes through. But yeah, definitely being squished together and acting like I'm putting money in the church plate thing, that coins jump up.
All right. Thank you all for being here and for your beautiful artwork. My question in relation to what you just said, Michael, talking about conversation and the contemplative nature of both of your designs. I guess my question is, you spoke about iteration. Where do you feel that you're holding space for the conversation, or actually doing the design stops and it's time for the artwork to be done and for the conversation to start? Does that make sense? Okay. How do you know when your work is complete?
I feel like, I think.
And let me add on this, is because you spoke about the weightiness and the deep, rich history behind both of your artwork. That encapsulates a lot. So when do you know it's complete in that frame of mind?
You're looking to me now, huh?
No, I can go, but I want you to go, because that's a deep question. You need to.
I'll tell you this. I had a professor was a professor from college. He wasn't even my professor, but he was teaching, and I always remember this quote he said to me. He said, "A project is never done; it's just due." So that means the work is never complete. It's always a work in progress. The work that I created here, I've already been thinking about how I build on it, the next iteration of it. And I look at these works as always beginning of conversations. And so each time I present work, it's the beginning of another conversation. Sometimes it may be the continuing of a conversation, but the conversation is never done. And I relate that to when we think about life and death culturally, they're connected to us. When we think culturally, it's a part of our culture. We don't look at it as a separation. It's just in a circular, reciprocal situation. It's part of the journey, right? So the work, it continues to evolve. It continues to grow. The conversations grow, but there's never a period when it's literally done.
Sounds like you create space for joy, like you spoke about earlier, in the doing, right? That sounds like what Big Mama would say. Just do it. Don't ask questions. So being able to work through that expression and move on, I think that allows you to hold space for yourself, to find joy in that and feel, I wouldn't say complete, but you feel like you've expressed what you needed to.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I agree. I think it's like when you're talking about when it's something finished, it's like you said, I definitely believe that like it's never really finished because there's another iteration that I'm thinking about of how to design a couch or how to design things. Like for me, like I just kind of work as like this idea of thinking about space. Like I went to interior design school too. So before I went to architecture school, I was in interior design school. So in interior design school is more focused on like, you know, you can have a collection of things that kind of feel monolithic or together, or you can have something that's eclectic that kind of fits together. So for me, when I'm designing, I'm kind of thinking about how things kind of fit into a room and they kind of are having a conversation. So whether it's, I want these things to live in the living room, but I want them to feel like they're our family, but you know, that they are, you know, that they distant relatives too, but they can live in a room together. So I think when I'm designing, I am thinking about iteration, but I'm also thinking about how things live in space together and how those things can be harmonious and feel like a space, you know, and like those are one of the main things I was thinking about through materiality, whether it's like, this is leather, this is iron, this is glass, this is stone, like all the other pieces that was designed in this collection. I was all thinking about that because the name of this whole collection that came out was We Got to Get Back to the Crib. So that was me saying like getting back to the essence of who I am, getting back to the cultural things that are important to me, getting back to that, getting back to like admit that small little chapel. Doesn't matter how much success I've had in life, like didn't matter what moment I ever had. Whenever things got tough, I drove to Louisiana and would sit down there and my grandpa would get that oil. I don't know if you know about that oil. It'd be rolling in my eye. I'm like, damn, Papa, that much oil? Like, yeah, that would have been just enough. But like those ideas of those, so I definitely think about space and iteration and how things collectively come together. And when I feel like things are coming collectively together, I'm like, okay, let's try something new.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I want to start off by thanking both of you for being here and sharing a lot of intimate moments that you guys have had with your artworks and the intimate reflection that you've had in just creating your artworks. As an artist, finding my style, I like to create from a childlike place and a childlike imagination. So this might be a weighty question, but I was curious to know if you had the opportunity to sit with your child self today.
Sound like counseling right now. keep going. Go
ahead. What would you tell them about the two people sitting here with us today?
You go first.
Dang, that's deep. I think I'll just probably tell myself not to be scared. I think that that vulnerability and iteration and constant evolution is okay. I think that's something that I was kind of, being an athlete, I was very much in like a strict type of line. One of my college teammates is back there. We played together back there, Cyrus. He's out here. He was a running back. But growing up in Texas, like playing football, it was just very like, you do these things, you do that. And like there was moments where I would step outside the line and I would get chastised by the system, whether it was my coach, whether it was like whoever it was constantly like trying to keep me into this box of way of thinking. So I would just say, don't be scared of like, that's okay. Like things have to be pruned, right? The olive trees get their best growth after they're pruned. You know, there's this sacrificial thing, like sacredness comes after sacrifice, and then you have to sacrifice and it becomes righteousness and you can reach where you want to be. And I think for me, it's just go for it, you know? And I think I've been doing that lately. Like there's moments where I feel like, you know, scared, like, dang, why am I, you know, like, I'm like doing something completely new. Like I was just supposed to go play golf. I was done, like, and then I want to go do something else. But I think it's just not being scared to iterate. Like we just said, like we're constantly iterating. Don't be scared of pivoting, and don't be scared of getting knocked down and what that feels like, because it's really you judged on how you get back up.
No, thanks. You know, it's funny. I was thinking about being the conductor. When you're on the I was thinking about Harriet Tubman. And as a child, the curiosity is so high that we just go and do. And we're leaders, and not even knowing that we're leaders. We don't worry about who's talking about us. We don't worry about if this one's not going to be my friend anymore. We just go after what we want. And so I would say to my younger self, keep that energy, keep that fire, keep that curiosity. And just remember, when you're in a leadership position with your work and with your life, people will talk about you. But that's okay, because you remember when you were a child, you didn't care. You just stopped playing with them. You went and found new friends. You found a new tribe, right? But you were focused and you were determined to figure out how to ride that bike, to figure out how to shoot those hoops, figure out how to hit the ball. Keep that same determination, and you will go far. And just remember, the people who want to ride the train with you, cheer you on, or who are going to be your friend, you will know, and they will be there for you no matter what you do. And those are the people that you continue to support and surround yourself with. So that's the thing I would tell my younger self.
I feel like we just went to counseling. We didn't need that. We were doing good. You just like, let me give y'all a counseling session right now.
All right, well, that seems like a good place to end. Do you want to have a...
Oh, sure. I just want to thank you both so much for allowing me to include you in this exhibition. I will say that I feel such a camaraderie with the both of you, especially around that it is still the work. Every exhibition here is just like an opening statement. It's for you to go and explore and go deeper. If I could put all the things I'm thinking about each of those works, the entire walls would be surrounded with text, right? So I get about 120 words per label, y'all. So please go deeper, go further. And I didn't want to leave without showing a couple of things. So this is one of the environments that Michael created. So this is for you to go and research, y'all. So look it up. Another. And then Malene's book, Crafted Kinship, will be available
October 29th, but you can still pre-order. Pre-order anywhere books are sold, online or your...
And we will also be selling them here in the bookstore once they are out. So thank you both so much. Thank you for this incredible audience, and we hope to see you back at MOAD soon. Please fill out your surveys. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, because even though my first time meeting you, I've always followed your work, and kind of like you've been like inspiration to you. So like seeing both of you, the way that you guys kind of do y'all work and the interior design space and just creativity and art, and how you guys are like formulating, like not being scared and making systems and making ways for people to conversate and come around design. It's really impactful, and like you may not think that you are impacting people globally, but you are. So thank both of you guys for that.
And that's Layden Lewis there in the audience, another incredible designer.
Yes. Thank you for that, Michael. Thank you. Oh.